Within the United States Army, there exists some of the boldest, bravest, and most highly disciplined soldiers in the world. They can jump from aircraft at 25,000 feet or emerge from a submarine in the dead of night. They appear suddenly, without warning, and a 12-man team can wreak as much havoc as a small army. These men are the elite special forces, the masters of guerrilla warfare. Entry into this fraternity of warriors is as tough as the men themselves. For every 100 soldiers who attempt to join their ranks, only 5 will make it and earn the right to wear the Green Beret. They assume risks far beyond the call of duty and react first to any crisis. They are extremely lethal. They are the eyes and ears of the U.S. Army. They are special forces. With little fanfare, they slip deep into enemy territory. Away from the main force for days at a time, they quietly gather intelligence without being seen. Called upon, they'll execute commando strikes and undercover sabotage operations. Almost always outnumbered, the special forces rely on their stealth, their cunning, and their audacity to get the job done.
You don't sign up for the special forces if you want to be famous, because you're going to be anonymous. And you don't sign up for the special forces to make money, because there isn't much money to be made. So you get people with a bent toward courage, with a conviction of patriotism, and a willingness to sacrifice if necessary and suffer for the benefit of their nation.
Known to many as the elite Green Berets, the Special Forces have no shortage of volunteers. Each year, hundreds of candidates come to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, seeking a place in the Special Forces. All these volunteers are sergeants with at least 3 years' experience in the Army. Most have come here because they want to break out of the conventional Army mold. Although they have scored in the top percentile of the demanding Special Forces entrance exam, by the end of a month, most will be back at their old jobs in the Army. Each morning begins with grueling physical exercises that challenge the candidate's emotional stamina.
Here, you're exactly what you're worth. What you do is what you're worth. You can prove yourself here, or you can totally fail yourself here.
Carrying backpacks that weigh 70 pounds while lugging heavy loads causes even well-conditioned candidates to tire easily. The men quickly learn to share the burden, but throughout hot days that last up to 20 hours, sleep deprivation tends to bring out hidden emotions.
They kept us awake a lot longer than we needed to be. They gave us about 4 hours sleep a night. They were looking for people that could handle that. They could work for reasonable periods of time under a lot of stress. It adds up. It'll bring out a flaw. If someone has a weakness, like they don't like somebody on the team, you start getting them real tired, they'll start talking about it, you'll start arguing, and eventually either he'll leave, they'll get in a fight or something like that. You can't fake it here. You either pull your weight or people point you out and they'll find out. They'll either square you away or you won't have a job.
Most of the selection tests are goal-driven. Demanding missions are assigned without directions on how to achieve them.
The toughest thing about it was you didn't really know what was coming up next. They would brief you, this is what you've got to do today. They didn't tell you how to do it. They didn't tell you how long you had to do it. Just the answer was always, do the best you can. If you ask questions, that's usually the response you get. Do the best you can.
The instructors rarely intercede, but they take plenty of notes and know what to look for. Men who are good leaders as well as followers. Team players who complain little and keep trying. Those with personality conflicts are monitored.
If you're going to be one of those guys that you get halfway through something and you say, oh, well, what the heck am I doing here? Forget it. Then you're not the type of people we're looking for. We want people that are going to stay for the long distance, not quit in the middle.
It's a test. It's a gut check. You find out who's a team player and who isn't. I learned a lot about what I have inside. To tell you the truth, when I look back at it, I don't know how I made it through. You put in 100%, and you pass that point. You pass 100% to where everything you have, you're putting out into that one specific task you're doing.
Candidates who make it through the Special Forces assessment and selection course often gain a heightened sense of courage and confidence.
When I finished, it was probably the proudest day that I'd had in the Army, knowing that I had accomplished something so many people have tried to accomplish but couldn't.
Sometimes 70% of the group is gone by the 31st day. For those left, their candidacy enters its second phase, and each prospect begins training in a specialized field. Some will become weapons specialists. They'll get to know a variety of small arms, old, new, American, and foreign. They also become familiar with heavier weapons. The Special Forces weapons specialist is an expert in infantry tactics, including ambushing, recon patrolling, and map reading. He is also a master of guerrilla and counter-guerrilla warfare. Other candidates enter the communications specialty, mastering Morse code, cryptography, and the operation and maintenance of portable radio systems.
Designed to be self-sufficient. We're their eyes and ears. And because of that reason, that's why the communications sergeant on an operational attachment is so important, and why his job is one that must be done correctly. We can actually take a radio wave, bounce it up into the ionosphere, and using a correct azimuth, knowing where you are, knowing where your distant station is, we can take and send the messages basically anywhere in the world we need to from our position.
Engineer specialists are expected to know every type of American and foreign-made landmine they might encounter in action. Engineers are also taught demolition techniques on all types of structures, including rail lines, bridges, and buildings. The curriculum also covers underwater explosives.
The engineer is really key. In a hot war situation where you're training guerrillas behind enemy lines, sabotage is going to be your primary mission, and of course that's demolitions. But in a Cold War situation or in a counterinsurgency situation where your primary goal is to establish a close rapport with the people, you help people with well digging projects, with school building projects, with road building projects, and really this is probably the most satisfying thing that Special Forces does.
The medical specialists have the toughest and longest training and are always in demand overseas. Other candidates enter the intelligence specialty. Their discipline varies from photo interpretation to prisoner interrogation. Each specialist takes other training, including foreign internal affairs, psychological warfare, and even hand-to-hand combat. After nearly a year of training in their specialty, the men are brought together in 12-man groups known as A-teams. A-team members are expected to cross-train each other in their area of specialty in the event that one might be separated or killed in action.
Here you have to be able to think on your feet quickly. Leadership is at all levels. You never know when the guy in charge isn't going to be there anymore, when you're going to have to take control of an element at any time.
A primary A-team mission is to recruit insurgent guerrilla fighters and organize them into a fighting group. By sharing their knowledge with the guerrillas, the Special Forces multiply their effectiveness.
You have the capability, because there are 12 of them, you can split them into 2 units that have all of the specialties covered, and they can work out of 2 different locations. Or because of the cross-training, you can split them into 3, or you can split them into 4. And these 12 guys, have the capability to organize up to maybe 1,200 guerrillas or counter-guerrillas. So they're actually a cadre for a much larger force.
To become a Green Beret, candidates have to demonstrate they can slip into enemy territory without compromising their location and mission. In wartime conditions, they must cross over mountains, snow, or jungle terrain. Moving only with the weapons, ammunition, and food they can carry, these candidates begin to appreciate the importance of their physical fitness training. One of the quickest ways to infiltrate is the parachute halo drop, meaning a high-altitude jump with a low-altitude parachute opening. These men sometimes jump with 100 pounds of combat gear.
One of the advantages to a halo drop is you can fly your body over an international border, so the aircraft never actually encroaches on enemy airspace. Or you can open high and pull high, in which case you can go cross-country for as much as 30 miles and come in quite silently. Radar can pick up large groups, but you can get groups of people up to 4 people who won't even show up on the radar. So this is a great way of getting in undetected.
The Special Forces also train in submarine operations and can be released through hatches or even launched from torpedo tubes. Another means of water insertion is by helicopter. Once underwater, the divers use a breathing device that purifies their exhaled carbon dioxide for reuse, and no bubbles are released. For some, it takes nearly 2 years before they can wear the coveted Green Beret. But once qualified, the Special Forces A-Team is ready for any mission that comes its way.
Weapons at War will continue in a moment.
The Army Special Forces traces much of its heritage back to the Second World War. After Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt saw the need for accurate battlefield intelligence and turned to an old friend, William Donovan, to help establish a paramilitary espionage organization. Donovan, a World War I Medal of Honor recipient, was a Wall Street lawyer when he was chosen to create the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. Throughout the Army and beyond, a search went out for the best and brightest people to make up its ranks.
The OSS was a mixed bag of people. It had some intellectuals who were doing the analysis. It had some experts to go into countries and speak the languages fluently and act as agents, espionage. And it had people to do the more paramilitary work, which was what I was involved in. It was a combination, in other words, of all those different missions.
One of the screening prerequisites was for those who spoke a foreign language. Army Captain Aaron Banks spoke French and German. After his selection, he was sent to special schools in England.
They tested us psychologically, and they tested us for initiative and whether or not we were innovative, and physically. We went from school to school. One school taught demolitions, one taught foreign weapons. There was even one that taught you how to differentiate between different types of ammunition by just feeling them. You could do it in the dark.
We had a lot of training in preparation that was courage-type training. Some of it was image enhancement, I suspect, but most of it was to reduce the routine of using a weapon so that it was second nature. We didn't have to think about it. We fired weapons every single day of our training cycle. Different type of weapons, so we were totally comfortable with them.
We had guerrilla tactics in another one of the schools. Communications, we all had to be able to use Morse code on a radio up to 12 words a minute. Map reading, patrolling, gathering of intelligence, how to spread propaganda.
The OSS developed several methods for insertion into enemy territory, including one-man underwater submersibles. For quick extraction of its agents, the All-American pickup system was tested. OSS agents became seasoned parachutists, and jumping was their primary means of infiltration. As part of Operation Jedburgh, The OSS grouped its agents into three-man teams and gave them contacts of German resistance fighters in France, Belgium, and Holland. Each man was given civilian clothing and a new identity.
I had a French officer and an American radio operator with me on my team. We trained as a team and eventually parachuted into occupied France, and we had a reception committee there of a French agent who introduced us to someone that was starting a good resistance force. We then worked with him, trained his troops, brought in supplies to arm them, and then helped him plan specific operations against the Germans.
In 1943, Aaron Banks' Jedburgh team parachuted into southern France. Once in place, Bank began training the leaders of several underground units in the methods of unconventional warfare. His only link to the outside world was his portable transmitter.
We had what was called the suitcase radio. It had a range of 1,000 miles. It was a Morse code radio. You had to tap on the keys, and it fit into a suitcase that was a shabby-looking thing. And my radio operator would change his location every couple of days because the enemy did have radio location vehicles floating around. My radio operator was in contact twice a day with Algiers, and I requested arms, ammunition, rations, and we had a number of airdrops so that we were able to arm these people. And with the training that they got, they were in pretty good shape and getting ready to conduct guerrilla warfare.
The men were under orders to wait for the invasion of southern France.
And when we got the signal by radio that the invasion was imminent, we then unleashed them, and we operated between the southern forces of the Germans and their northern forces. And as soon as the invasion started, we knew it because we could hear the big guns of the Navy ships, and we waited. And before too long, the retreat started up the Rhone Valley, and that's when we went to work on them. We had blown the railroad, so they had to take their tanks overland instead of on freight cars. And that caused them to expend a lot more oil and gas, took a lot more time.
With all the tools at their disposal, the resistance teams ambushed German convoys and foot patrols.
They did contribute not only in the direct assistance to the army movements, but also to the fact that the Germans lost a large number of men who were holed up in southwestern France and were trying to get out. And they were harassed on the roads, and eventually most of them surrendered.
We kept them bunched up, we blocked them, and it gave the Air Force a chance to strafe the devil out of them, as well as the casualties we created ourselves. When that ended, we figured that we had around 2,500 to 2,800 guerrillas in our whole force. Now that's an accomplishment that just 3 men, 3 Allied soldiers, were able to accomplish.
General Eisenhower later estimated the resistance guerrilla movement to have had the effectiveness of 15 infantry divisions.
The whole country wanted to be free of the German occupation. And there's one big thing about guerrilla warfare. If guerrillas have the support of the people, and they have the support of an outside power, they are practically unbeatable. They're almost sure to win.
Weapons at War will continue in a moment.
After the OSS was disbanded, many of its members joined the CIA. But as the Cold War was heating up, the U.S. military lost much of its ability to conduct guerrilla operations and looked for new answers.
When it was sold to the Army, I was in charge of a small staff in the Pentagon in 1951 that had the mission of convincing the Army to form and establish an unconventional warfare unit. The mission that the Army was sold on was the conduct of guerrilla warfare and all its aspects. And that was the mission of Special Forces right through the 50s.
The Special Forces operations were classified top secret for years until President Kennedy saw in them a means to export American guerrilla expertise, and he expanded their scope.
President Kennedy was the first one, I think, to recognize that counterinsurgency was a viable strategic concept for the United States. So Kennedy, I think, felt that the Special Forces might be an instrumentality through which counterinsurgency could be first learned by our own forces and then taught to others to bolster governments under siege if they were governments that it would be in our interest to keep intact.
In the Kennedy years, Special Forces operations were given top priority, and the Navy began training their own Special Forces, named SEAL teams. Kennedy also recognized the Green Beret as an official part of the Special Forces uniform. The first challenge to face the Green Berets would also be their longest. They would fight the communist guerrillas in Vietnam for nearly 14 years. The Special Forces began by serving as advisors to the South Vietnamese Army. As the conflict grew, so did their numbers.
Special Forces were the best trained, best equipped soldiers in the world. In Vietnam, we were the best there. All the people on our team were specialists. Each member of our team had a specialty. We had operational intelligence, we had heavy and light weapons, we had demolitions, communications. The guys on my team all spoke 2, 3, some of them 5 foreign languages.
You cross-trained each other in your particular specialties, and you liked working together as a team. And that's what separated us really from other units. No matter how old or new you were on the team, you always felt an integral part of it, and you trusted the guys that you worked with, and they trusted you.
Although their missions were normally carried out covertly, the conventional army forced the Green Berets to base out of fixed camps throughout South Vietnam. Since they were in fortified positions, the Green Berets were common targets of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army regular forces. Specialized forces also manned the highly secret SOG groups and specialized in deep penetration behind enemy lines.
In the Vietnam War, we had the Studies and Observations Group, which was the name for our group that was doing covert operations into North Vietnam, into Laos, and into Cambodia. They were all Special Forces trained on the Army side. They were a group that had a dedication to doing a difficult mission, doing it well, and knowing that the guy next to them had a similar attitude and point of view, and he could rely on it.
The SOG groups were often out of contact with headquarters for months at a time and counted on airdrops to keep them replenished with food and ammunition. With help from the Navy and Air Force Special Operations units, the Green Berets were responsible for nearly half of all enemy intelligence gathered during the war. When contact was made, they called in airstrikes or the Special Forces' own mobile strike force.
Would go in along trails and where they knew the enemy was coming on through, and they would put surveillance on enemy camps And then what they would do is they would call in the mobile strike forces, and the mobile strike forces would come and take them out, or they would call in aircraft and come in and take them on out. And they also did border crossing into Cambodia and Laos. Because the enemy was right there. There was nothing stopping us from going over there at the time. You know, how are you going to tell where a border's at? In the middle of a jungle, man. There's no way you can tell.
Even though the Green Berets were almost always outnumbered, they knew they could call in helicopters if they were pressed too hard. In the jungle, one method of escape was the stabo rig.
The stabo rig came online in late '68, early '69, and it was a complete patrol harness with just the stuff that you had on you. You could rig a couple of leg straps on your harness, and that way you had both hands free, and you could actually fight while you were being dragged out of the jungles. It's a hoot. I mean, you just don't have more fun than that. It beats every amusement park ride I was ever on.
Weapons at War will continue in a moment.
The Special Forces were the primary American military presence in South Vietnam when the communist Viet Cong guerrillas began their campaign of terror in 1962. As the conflict spread into war, it became clear the Green Berets' mission would be to beat the guerrillas at their own game. But few knew their most trusted ally would be a relatively unknown tribe of mountain people known as the Montagnards. There were over 30 Montagnard tribes in the mountains of South Vietnam, each with their own language. Since the Montagnards had a history of being oppressed by both the North and South Vietnamese, they were eager to learn how to defend their villages. Many of their men joined the Special Forces Civilian Irregular Defense Group.
For most of us who had the chance to be around them, there was a feeling that the Montagnards probably were the only truly honest, decent people in the whole damn country of Vietnam. Their word was their bond. If they said they would stay with you and fight, they would stay unto the death. And the Special Forces guys took to that.
The Montagnards were joined by other groups who opposed the communists and were eager to fight. These mercenaries and locals knew the jungle terrain and were a great source of intelligence.
The people we hired were, in essence, the true essence of the word, mercenaries in their own right. They were deserters from the North Vietnamese army. We had some Cambodians, we had Chinese Nuns, and of course we had the infamous Montagnards. These people weren't in a military force as such, other than the one that we hired them for, recreated, and we paid them, took care of their families, trained them, and operated with them.
We paid them more money. We gave them food. We gave them clothing. We furnished them with all their uniforms, boots. We furnished them with housing, ammunition. We gave them weapons. If they got killed or wounded, we paid their families money. So we took care of them. It was like one big family, and it was like our own little army.
Many of the Montagnards served in the Special Forces base camps and oftentimes had to defend them from attack.
You go into some miserable Special Forces camp in the mountains, and you look in the trench, and there's a guy with a rifle and his wife and his baby. He's not going to run. It's not in him anyway. But he's going to stay because he has his wife and his kid with him.
Other Montagnards served in the Mobile Strike Force, a large helicopter assault group developed to help out A-teams in distress.
Special Forces' role was to train indigenous troops. I believe that we did that with high efficiency and great effect. The 5th Mobile Strike Force, which was the largest mobile strike force in Vietnam. In it, there were 17 of us Americans. We trained 1,700 fully equipped fighters the best equipped, best fighters in Vietnam. Anytime there was an intense flare-up, they would send for the 5th Mobile Strike Force. We had 7 companies of trained Montagnards and Chinese, and we were the best equipped, so they usually sent for us.
The Special Forces made use of fast, low-flying helicopters for quick aerial insertions.
If their camp was under attack, then we went in, reinforced the camp, repelled the invaders. If there were lots of activity in the area, we'd go in and do real aggressive patrolling in the area.
In the jungle, the Green Berets met their adversary, the Viet Cong guerrillas. In their rubber sandals and black pajamas, the Viet Cong didn't appear formidable, but their strength was in their resourcefulness and conviction. They knew an ambushed American unit would lose more than men. They would lose their morale.
They were so disciplined that they picked up every piece of brass on the battlefield. They didn't leave anything on the battlefield. Most of them had handmade weapons, handmade guns, rifles, pistols. They made their own booby traps. They had handmade claymore mines that they made. Of course, they employed punji stakes. They employed punji pits, all kinds of traps.
The Viet Cong were also masters of sabotage. Through their vast networks of tunnels, they could strike quickly and disappear underground to fight another day.
There was no place safe in Vietnam. Essentially, even in the rear areas, the potential for rocket or mortar fire or sniper or bomb or any of those activities could take place.
At its peak in 1966, the Green Berets controlled over 80 base camps and some 60,000 mercenaries. With help from the South Vietnamese, they took the fight to the enemy in their own territory, targeting Viet Cong officers, kidnapping prisoners, and sabotaging weapon stockpiles. Their kill-loss ratio was without equal. This bold move of taking the guerrilla war to the guerrillas was finally abandoned, however. Along with their many accolades came unfavorable press reports and animosity from the regular army.
We NCOs, we took pride in being unconventional soldiers. We were there to win. We weren't there to punch our tickets or get promotions. We were there to do our job and get out in the shortest amount of time. But the conventional thinking of the Army at that time was they didn't want any special elite forces there because they thought we were just too cocky for our own good. And they didn't like the way we wore our jump boots or we wore our tiger fatigues. But we won. We won our battles. And our men respected us. And we respected ourselves.
By the end of the war, the Green Berets had earned over 13,000 Bronze Stars, 2,600 Purple Hearts, and 16 Medals of Honor. No group their size ever came close to that record.
Weapons at War will continue in a moment.
In the early 1960s, the Defense Department was looking for a way to rescue downed pilots from remote areas where airplanes couldn't land and helicopters couldn't reach. When the Fulton recovery system was developed, the Special Forces took notice of its ability to take men out of tough spots.
The Fulton recovery system, which is nicknamed the Skyhook, is a terrific device. What they do is they put the guy in a big leather suit, inflate a weather balloon with a rope attached to it that's attached to the suit, and the C-130 with a big scoop on the front of it snatches the rope, and that's how they pick you up off the ground and winch you into the aircraft, gathering speed as you go.
Although much of its use is classified, the Skyhook is still employed today. In the aftermath of Vietnam, Special Forces funding was slashed, but restored later as more people took notice of their ability to inexpensively project power abroad. After
For the 1990 Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, 110 Special Forces teams were dispatched to the Gulf and went to work helping foreign forces that made up the Allied coalition. As trainers in small arms, heavy weapons, and demolitions, the Green Berets lived up to their reputation as force multipliers.
You also have those people that are cross-trained in other military occupational specialties. And if you can imagine in the acquisition of a skill over 5 years, where you're competent, during your career you might pick up 3 or 4 MOS occupational skills. That's where your force multiplier comes in.
With so many armies teamed to fight alongside one another on a battlefield over 400 miles wide, the chances of fratricide were high, but the Special Forces filled the need for a common bond and became the glue that held the coalition together.
Those various Arab armies spoke different dialects of Arabic. Their communications gear wouldn't net. They didn't always, in each and every case, necessarily get on that wonderfully well with each other. And the guys that made all of that work were the SF teams that were with them, that had radios that would net, and they really coordinated that whole thing. You know, I talk to people all the time that think that Desert Storm was a cakewalk. Well, it was a cakewalk simply because it was so well organized and so well run.
The Green Berets also had global positioning satellite equipment and communications gear that allowed them to keep Allied commanders abreast of each army's location, fighting strength, and supplies on hand.
We're the guys on the ground. We're the guys that talk the language. We're the guys that know how to get along with the people. And that's where you get your intelligence from. You know, just sitting around the fire shooting the breeze, and the next thing you know, you've got all kinds of information that you simply cannot get from a satellite photo.
According to General Schwarzkopf, commander of the U.S. forces in Desert Storm, the Green Berets were the eyes and ears of U.S. intelligence. They were also the claws that penetrated the skin of the most elite Iraqi units.
The other mission that we performed during Desert Shield and Storm was a special reconnaissance, 140 miles, 150 miles deep. 8 teams in support of the main attack north of the Euphrates River. Really some interesting stories. Real heroes came out of that mission.
Special Forces A teams lived in sand burrows for days at a time to escape detection behind enemy lines. Within shouting distance of Iraqi ground units, they reported vital intelligence to Allied commanders. They also lasered designated targets for smart bombs and provided close air support.
Ain't nobody out there to help them. They're pretty much on their own once we launch them. When we launch them out there, they're carrying rucksacks that weigh 120 to 150 pounds. Can't move much, so you got to dig in.
Using high-tech parachutes to drift through the night sky above Iraqi positions, sometimes traveling 30 miles or more, American Special Forces teams used night vision goggles and special radios to report from mid-air on enemy formations below.
We flew by coalition aircraft to about 35 miles from Baghdad, and roughly about sunset one night we flew preset pattern to avoid ground radar systems that the Iraqis had. Flew about an hour and a half in the air, across enemy territory, observing out the window using night vision devices. We observed enemy movement on the ground, flew over an encampment, flew over a convoy on the ground, and our missionary was along a roadside about 35 miles out of Baghdad. The helicopter stayed with us the whole time, the engines running, in case we were overrun. The exciting part was the fact that I got to see the light show over and in Baghdad from the ground during night using night vision devices. To me, it was just a great rush. You wonder beforehand if you're going to worry about things, be scared, whatever, but when it comes down to it, at least as far as I was concerned, it was a very enlightening experience. It was fun. After the mission, we reboarded the aircraft and flew a different route back. Other special operations units disabled communication towers and water wells.
They laser-designated Scud launchers and enemy tanks for aerial attack. They also blew up bridges to cut off avenues of retreat for the Iraqi Republican Guard.
Once we got into Kuwait, the mission was to clear Kuwait City. Prior to this time, we had worked on a plan and had divided the Kuwait City down into sectors, so each brigade then moved into its given sector, each Kuwaiti brigade with its special forces counterparts. As the Iraqis left Kuwait City, they left their positions with weapons and with ammunition. And everybody in Kuwait City that didn't want a weapon had one, everybody that wanted a weapon had two. A tremendous problem. I mean, there was just gunfire all over the place. None of the Iraqis, Kuwaitis, celebrated, firing their weapons up in the air. Not necessarily real dangers, but by the same token, it was kind of unnerving because you're never really sure who the hell was firing those weapons.
In the entire war, not one Green Beret was lost. Even after the end of hostilities, the Special Forces set up Operation Provide Comfort and assisted in feeding and building shelters for 1 million displaced Kurdish refugees. Although many military units are downsizing today, the Special Forces are seeing their mission expand as the potential for smaller conflicts grows.
Early in Special Forces, one of the criticisms was, if you take all the best soldiers and put them in these units, then you're going to degrade the quality of the regular units. And I can see why you wouldn't want to lose all your best officers and NCOs, but in actual fact, what these guys have done is, through the fact that they can train foreign armies and foreign guerrillas and foreign forces of various types, far from reducing the effectiveness of our forces, they've multiplied them many times over. I would say easily 10 times over.
These quiet professionals have one motto: to free the oppressed. For the A-Team, it's all in a day's work.
A lot of times when you're deployed, it's just you and your team. There are no other Americans there. There might not be anyone else who speaks English. So you kind of have to rely on each other for that emotional support. You work very tight with each other. We always kind of stick together. We're kind of a family. I enjoy the work. I enjoy the people. I enjoy the camaraderie. And I enjoy traveling. And I get the opportunity to help a lot of people and go do a lot of neat things. And I enjoy that.
On today's high-tech, fast-paced battlefield, the need for strategic reconnaissance is more vital than ever. If the mission requires a team to be inserted quietly into the most rugged of terrain, to remain undetected against all possible odds, and be able to operate without supervision, then the Special Forces will be called into action again. With fearless dedication and a fiercely proud tradition of excellence, these crack commandos will consider it an honor to be the first called into harm's way.
Coming up next, the British SAS, the French Foreign Legion, and the Green Berets take you on dangerous shock troop operations on Our Century. Then Our Century continues with the story of the Flying Tigers, the Eagle Squadron, and other do-or-die pilots of fortune. And tomorrow, Guts and Glory Sunday brings you sworn to secrecy's look at the strange and dangerous days of the phony war. At 9 Eastern, 10 Pacific, here on the History Channel, where the past comes alive.